But lockdown has its consequences. You use lockdowns to get people vaccinated so that when you open up, you won't have a surge of infections because you're dealing with an immunologically naive population to the virus because they've not really been exposed because of the lockdown. The problem is that the vaccines that they've been using are not nearly as effective as the vaccines that are used in the United States, the UK, EU, and other.
So I'm assuming he's talking about other countries, maybe China, when he's saying that their vaccine isn't as effective as the vaccine that we have. I don't know where he's getting that, though. We know that the vaccines here are not stopping the spread. Plenty of people who've had the vaccines have also gotten COVID. So I don't know where he's getting this idea that, no, ours are more effective than theirs. I think that the jury's maybe still out on that.
Yeah, and I'm sure some people are going to bristle at the framing of the lockdowns being, it almost sounds coercive to get people
totally
vaccinated. I mean, the one of the narratives that was put out at a certain point, and again, there have been many, was that we were going to be able to hit, kind of get enough people vaccinated so that we did stop the virus, that it wasn't able to spread through the population, that if we were going to get 95% of people vaccinated, it meant that we wouldn't have to keep getting vaccines in perpetuity and living this way. And that now seems to be somewhat of a shift, saying that, of course, we're going to be living with this forever. And there's conversations about different kinds of vaccines being promulgated that could be taken in various ways and make it a lot easier for the pharmaceutical companies to distribute, which, of course, makes a lot of folks who are concerned about the profiteering that can very easily happen in this sector and arguably has already been happening in the sector with respect to the COVID vaccines, could be influencing public policy.
Oh, yeah. They love to make money. There's no doubt about that. And now that we got to have endless boosters for what end, so that's, of course, they're just making more and more and more money, especially since these vaccines are not sterilizing. They're not sterilizing of COVID. They only last in your system to suppress your ability to get infected for a very short period of time. And they found the more doses they give and the more variants there are, even that time frame shortens even more. I think the fourth dose, they're showing that it only gives you some protection against infection for a couple of weeks. That's it, maybe even shorter than that. So unless you're going to vaccinate yourself right when you're about to get infected, and how could you even know that when you're going to get infected? If everybody knew when, then they'd be able to hide away, I suppose. And that's, and speaking of hiding away, him saying, well, we use lockdowns in order to get people vaccinated because the people didn't have any exposure to the virus because they were locked down. It's like, okay, well, there's some circular logic going on there. Maybe some people, we know that there were large groups of people that were not very vulnerable to COVID. Young people were not very vulnerable to COVID. They would catch it. Most of them wouldn't feel it if they were in their 20s. Maybe they would sniffle a bit, and that was it. Had maybe they gotten some exposure to it, then there wouldn't be that vulnerability, but we locked everybody down.
Well, here's the thing. I think the important fact that is still relevant is that there were people, including young people and otherwise healthy people, who used to get COVID and actually die for it. And we had much higher hospitalization rates and much higher death rates from COVID before the initial vaccines. And I think what is going to be material to discover is how much that initial boost continues to give you that protective effect of, okay, you might still catch COVID and get sick, but you're not going to have the worst effects that we had early in the pre-vaccine days. Or do you have to keep getting boosters just to keep that effect up? Because if it's the former, if we're all kind of good to be vulnerable, those of us who are not immunocompromised and all of those kinds of things are okay to get it the same way that we get the flu, I think that prescribes a certain kind of public policy approach for each of us in our individual lives that is different than this other approach, this other world where we actually could go back to that pre-vaccine response to the virus if we don't keep up the course of boosters and all of that. So I'm interested to see more scientific clarity, from these public health officials about what the actual reality of the situation is.
The normalcy that was promised us from the beginning took this long, and it was by court order, not anything Biden administration has done. They fought against normalcy.
Yeah, so I think that in some ways this is the bet that Biden has made, right? Because what he has chosen to do is a lot of COVID theater. Insofar as we had the State of the Union, which was maskless, there has been an attempt to create a veneer that everything is back to normal, because obviously there's an understanding that the more people feel like he's resolved COVID, the more his election chances and the chances of Democrats in the fall are going to be better. However, you cannot, I don't think, posture in a way that makes it seem like COVID is over and it's okay to wear masks, and then be upset and politicize a choice to get rid of masks in the plain context. I think both are pretty attenuated from the reality of what probably common sense and science dictates, but there's no central keeper of the scientific fact at this point, because the CDC has undermined its own credibility, the Biden administration has undermined its own credibility, and it really is left to individuals at this point, quite literally, because the airplane mandates are gone, to figure out what works best for them. And I think we're going to see a lot of purchases of high quality KN95 masks and other gear for those people who are still feeling very much like they're in a risky situation. It's risky business.
I'll have more to say about that in my radar, but for right now, despite Biden sinking approval ratings in just about every demographic in the country, we're learning that Biden is planning another run at the White House in 2024. And obviously, according to new reporting from The Hill, President Biden has told Obama he is planning to run for re-election, and according to the sources, they're holding on to the belief that Biden is the only person who can beat Trump. I mean, I've been saying this all along. The idea that anyone other than Biden is going to be the Democratic candidate in 2024 is like totally absurd. No one, he would have to be dead to not be running.
Well, look, there's some mixed reporting on that I was reading this morning. There is apparently Joe Biden, he has said he is going to run, but there are people in the progressive camp who have said firmly that they believe there's going to be a progressive challenger. Ro Khanna has said recently on my show and other places that he is not going to run in 2024. He might in 2028. We'll see if there's a progressive challenger from somewhat outside of the party, like someone like Marianne Williamson, who there's been some excited reporting about. There was a New York Times Sunday feature a couple of months ago that asked that question. But I think after what has happened last week with the Congressional Progressive Caucus endorsing Shontel Brown, the moderate opponent to Senator Nina Turner in Ohio's 11th district, after the repeated cycle of reporting about Pramila Jayapal apparently undermining progressive efforts in that bloc to vote as a bloc to hold up must-pass legislation in order to get concessions for the left. After all of the disappointments that have come out of the last 2 years for the progressive movement, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a significant push to have some faction of the Democratic Party, these leftists, decouple themselves from this institution that has been so disrespectful to them. And if it is Joe Biden again, I think that people should take a good hard look at some of the approval numbers we just watched, because I think there's a level of dissatisfaction that is new, something that we didn't see in 2016 and didn't see in 2020.
It would not surprise me at all if he draws a progressive challenger, but the idea that he was not going to like no one seeks power, no one obtains power and then just gives it up.
No one runs for president 3 times and then says, never mind,
right.
I'm good.
So that was, especially with the, his worst chances are, I don't know, let's say there's like a 45% chance only that he's reelected. I don't know that that's true, but if you have a 45% chance of being president for 4 more years, you will take that.
Absent of medical catastrophe.
Right. That would be the only circumstance in which he would not run.
U.S. publicly funded institutions agreed to delete data on behalf of the WIV.
So this is legally they're allowed to do this. Do we know why they were granted the legal right to delete the data? Because it wasn't just, or was this just a request by Wuhan Institute and they said, yeah, okay, we'll do it, or was this actually a legal? I mean, they're allowed to legally to do this for some reason. Is it because the information's the property of China and the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of unknowns here. So this is a memorandum of understanding, which isn't quite a contract, but it's sort of a legal agreement commonly entered into between research institutions. And it's not clear who wrote it, but there are some clues. There are some sort of clunky or unusual provisions in this that suggest it might have been written by Chinese partners and sort of agreed to by the lab in Texas. And so I think the unknowns here are if this was, purely academic work, typically we would want that work to benefit society and to be public. So why was there this requirement that, if either of the labs asked, all of the data and documents related to this collaboration would be deleted? And, looking at this BSL-4, the highest maximum biocontainment lab in Texas, why they would agree to it, I think there was this push to understand what sort of, high risk virology research was going on in China. And so perhaps labs in the US were willing to enter into, let's just say, legally shaky agreements in order to gain some insight into what was going on. But clearly, if there were clues to the COVID origin story at this lab in Texas, we might not even know about them because of this provision.
Can you give me a sense of what level of investigations, how many investigations or legal actions are going on trying to get to the root of what caused the virus? Because you would think something of this magnitude would have a level of inquiry surrounding it that was at least as notable and I'd say covered by the press as something like inquiries into Trump's finances and the like. But I feel like I know very little about how much is going into getting at the bottom of the origin story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes to sort of the more recent letter from congressional Republicans surrounding whether or not Christian Anderson was being a virologist in California was being perfectly honest when he said that he wasn't involved in any efforts to suppress any theory about the COVID origin story. Essentially, what we've seen over the last 2 years is virologists saying one thing in public and then another thing in private. And what my organization, US Right to Know, has found through FOIA requests is that at the same time, many virologists and scientists were saying any sort of implication that this, novel coronavirus could have come from the novel coronavirus labs in Wuhan is a conspiracy theory. They were saying in private amongst each other that was a very real possibility. And some features of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, are a little bit unusual and may point to it not having arisen in nature. So I think there's this kind of false consensus in the press built sort of on these not totally truthful public statements. And, another thing I'll say is that our organization gets a lot of flack just for looking into this. And so any reporter who wants to sort of investigate this very real possibility, this very possible connection between the Wuhan Institute of Virology or the Wuhan CDC lab and SARS-CoV-2 risks being called a conspiracy theorist.